Hey, my name is Derek Caffe. I am an ATL real estate broker who specializes in investment properties. So today I wanted to talk about how do you know how much you can afford for your first investment property. And the place I say to start is where you'd start, whether you're buying a personal property or an investment property, or you're like me, your first property is your first investment property. So the first place to start is typically with the financing aspect. So a lot of times people call up and they're asking, I want to see, I found the house that I like. One of the first questions I'm going to ask them outside of, are you working with another real estate agent or broker? The second question I'll be asking is, do you already have financing? And sometimes people will get offended by that question because they're like, oh, well, you don't think I could afford the house? And, they just feel like you're questioning their money status. And it's not that. A lot of times when you are a real estate broker, you're a professional at what you do, a professional at getting people from wanting to purchase a property to getting them in the property. And so you know what's the most efficient way to make that happen. And so one of the most important aspects of that is figuring out the financing from the get-go. And the reason you want to figure out the financing is because the financing determines how I, as a real estate broker, are going to help you search for property. So say in your head, you're like, oh, I want to look at a property around 500,000. Now, the market's slow right now for the most part, or I'm not going to even call it slow. I'm going to call it's just not as fast as it was during the pandemic. And so like now the days on market for houses are very similar to when I started in 2017. So for me, it's just a return to normalcy. Whereas, if you had just gotten into the market during the 2021, that 2021 to 2022 period when the rates and just everything, well, I'm going to say the housing, the values and everything was going crazy. That was very fast. And so now we're returning to normalcy. So say you find the perfect investment property for 500,000. Now it's a great deal. It's going to cash flow like crazy and you're ready to pull the trigger. So, or maybe there's lots of interest around this property. So you're like, okay, well, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to make an offer on the property. And so when you make that offer, a majority of the time, you're going to have proof of financing or a pre-approval letter or pre-qualification along with the offer. And to get that pre-approval, you have to go through the process with the bank. And so, say you've already found this house, ready to move forward. I'm like, okay, if I didn't ask you to have your financing letter ahead of time, and then we find the property, and then after we found the property, then you start to pursue the financing. So you found the great property, and we might have seen 10 houses, 15 houses to get to this one investment property that was best for you. And when we did that, we find out, or when you go through with the pre-approval process, you find out you only qualify for 300,000. So the property that you want is 500, but your pre-approval is for 300,000. So all of a sudden, we're left out in the cold because unless you can make up that $200,000 gap, there's no way we're moving forward with this property. And so if we know this from the get-go, we can find properties that work within your price range. And even, I'll point out, even if you're approved for 300,000, that doesn't mean you have to purchase a property up to 300,000. I remember the first time I bought my first home and investment property, which was a duplex. I was approved, I want to say, for like 220, but that was 220, 240, somewhere in that ballpark. But the first property I bought was 110,000. And so I know my agent at the time was very much like, oh, okay, we got a little bit more to spend. But when I found my agent, I was specifically looking for an agent who specialized in investment properties. Now, what you'll find is most agents will say they specialize in investment properties. They'll specialize in whatever you want to buy, they specialize in. And I'm saying that, very specialized in. Basically, it's just like, look, they're like, I can help you to purchase a property. I don't care what kind of property it is, trying to make some commission. So come with me. So that's one of the reasons that I definitely let people know, like, I specialize in this. Like, I have investment properties. I have a construction company. I am in this game since 2015. You can be approved for 300, but you don't need to purchase a property that costs 300 if there are properties that meet your criteria at a lower price range. So affordability in the investment space is all about, will the property cash flow? And so in today's market, today's market being, was it the second quarter of 2023? So in today's market, you probably need to be a little bit more creative in generating cash flow. So an investment broker, a real estate broker who specializes in investment properties, can help you figure out different ways to make sure the property cash flows, such as potentially adding on a guest suite, figuring out whether the zoning allows for an accessory dwelling unit to be built, or a guest house to be put on. These different aspects can be a way to take a normal single family home and add a income source to it, or whether how to analyze Airbnb or short-term rentals. Those are the things that a broker who specializes in investment properties can help with. But overall, the main thing is you start with the financing. Once you figure out the financing, from there you can move on to, okay, what's within my criteria, and you can look up and down and figure out where you want to be. Now, typically with investment properties, I always say go for the quadplexes if you can get them. The issue is going to be quadplexes, triplexes, and duplexes are going to be very hard to find, simply because zoning laws changed somewhere in the 50s, 60s, 70s that outlawed them from being built, or to be built in very rare circumstances. So that's why that's why they exist, but you don't see as many as you could say, single family houses, which have dominated simply because the zoning laws have favored that type of housing. So with that being said, I would always recommend the duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, but you may have trouble finding those, but there's other creative ways to get into a property that allows you to find a way to generate income from that property. And that could be everything, like I said, from short-term rentals to figuring out a way to add a guest suite to the property, figuring out doing the roommate house hack if you're a single person, or you happen to, for example, when I first moved here to Atlanta over a decade ago, one of the first places I stayed was in Lilburn, and it was like a 5-bedroom house. I want to say it was a 5-bedroom house, and the owner had a guest suite or mother-in-law suite in the basement, and so he lived in the basement. And I know he had a girlfriend who came over from time to time, but he lived in the basement with his girlfriend, and he rented out all 5 of the bedrooms. And so we shared the common area, but each of us paid per room. And as I started my real estate journey 5-6 years later, from that experience when I had first got here, that was something that I harked back to, like, if I were to buy single family houses, how I would go about, generating cash flow from them if we were in an environment, or I was purchasing a property where it doesn't make as much sense to do that. So when it comes to how much house you can afford, it's always about analyzing the property, seeing the cash flow, making sure the cash flow is sufficient for you, looking at potentially cash on cash return, which is like how much you'll have total into the property and how long it'll take for those rents to pay you back that money that you've put in, whether that includes down payment, closing costs, etc. So I hope this video helped out, but that's what you're going to do when it comes to figuring out how much you can afford. Really, it's going to start with the financing. And once you figure out the financing, then it just comes down to analyzing different deals and figuring out different strategies.